It is currently 9:59 p.m. on the 1st of February 2024. It has been quite a chunk of time since we managed to record, and I hate repeating that exact same sentence, to be honest. As far as I'm concerned, this video will be the first of a brand new batch, as I am also going to be returning to the job that allowed me to do my daily uploads, really, my daily front to back sessions, my daily reactions. But this time we're going to be doing something a little bit different. You guys remember back in, I think, 2022, the first Sean Cross logo that I made for the channel. Well, now there is a new logo. Now there is a new redefined, purely deathcore version of my logo, as well as what I call a filthy foundation, or even an exoskeleton variant of that logo. That's a lot more my style. That seems to be the style that I'm navigating towards. So, I mean, basically, the idea of this will be to go ahead and do a little playthrough. So, starting off, I wanted to make sure that this logo was a lot more modernized, right? I wanted to make sure I put a lot of time into this logo. So during the process of this, I was trying to figure out styles. I was trying to make something that was really simple, that correlated with the previous design, maybe based in lowercase letters, but still had a little bit of edge to it. Maybe something that had a little bit more character compared to the last one, which was quite literally pretty normalized text. With that exoskeleton and the few barbs that were sticking out that kind of made it resemble a cactus of some sort. It was definitely the first attempt at me making a logo for the channel that would simply just provide you guys something. It would get me on my feet as far as wanting to be a graphic artist. It would get me on my feet as far as trying to get into that avenue. So with this one, I tried to make it as clean as possible, and I even remember reaching out to Derek Connolly of Nithful, Mr. Unholy Cannoli, in regards to the first design you're basically seeing before you at this time, in which it was very simple. And then, yeah, I decided to just restart the whole process, do a lot more squiggly stuff, try to see what corners I could utilize, and kind of aim for a more foliage, black metal sort of design. That didn't really seem to work. I tried my best with it, but in the end, it was more or less meant to be kind of like the Ooga Ooga logo, or your standard Slam logo, maybe even the Pasukan logo for Disembodied Tyrant, which is their fan base. So that's kind of an example I can provide. I tried to make the C as skinny as possible. I did a whole bunch of different stuff, attempted to return, because I wasn't really vibing with the other more attempted Slam version of the design, something that you could put in the background on the YouTube channel banner. I just really wasn't vibing with it. So then I tried to do a more non-symmetrical variant of the logo. I tried to make it boxy. That didn't really work. I did my best. And I can see right here that this was more or less like phase 3 or like plan C or something. And this logo was really meant for putting the more thistled black metal Ooga Ooga inspired logo. This would be putting this one in front of that one, because I love the aesthetic of having an entirely, completely ineligible, non-readable logo, and then having normal text in front of it. So this one was still trying to write on that exoskeleton vibe, but I was trying to make something that was a little bit more compact, and dancing around the designs, dancing around what are my own, I can't even call them my own versions of the certain letters, my own font. This was another version of that, just, trying to be a little bit more fun with it. Didn't really end up working out as much as I was wanting it to. So eventually, after checking out the exoskeleton, removing that older layer, trying to clean up the edges a little bit, I mean, obviously, the logo that you see before you in the thumbnail, and the logo you'll be seeing on the YouTube channel banner here pretty soon, this is absolutely not what that logo is. But I really was trying. I really was trying to, utilize what is the S and the S from the beginning to the end of the name. That was always the goal, is to attempt to make sure that those match. And well, you think of the South Side logo, which is, more or less gang stuff, but also it's what we all droodled in our notebooks when we were younger. And that's more or less the element of symmetry that you can easily utilize. So this was like phase 4, I think, attempt 4. This was definitely more or less inspired by the organectomy logo. I wanted to have all the letters branching out beneath. I wanted them to be as skinny and decrepit as possible. And then basically this one was a little less symmetrical than what I would have wanted. But nonetheless, then I tried to fit the sigils into there, because more or less I was trying to come up with something a little bit more like the Druid House logo, but a better version of the Druid House logo. And I don't believe I've posted a time lapse for that one just yet, so I'll be doing that one here pretty soon, as this is very, very easy to do. And especially when we add some music files in the background, that will make it flow by even quicker. So obviously with this one, I was trying to keep in mind Justin Perez's version of the Druid House logo, with the sigils on the far left and the far right of the logo, outside of the logo, and therefore the chaos residing within, that would resemble foliage, that would resemble twigs. But overall, I was very, very confused. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Shout out to Gamerceps, even though I'm not sponsored yet. Love their newest Jujutsu Kaisen flavor, Curse Energy. Really good stuff. Blue raspberry, so good. Helps you kickstart the morning off. But during this time, there's a big chunk of time to where, well, you can't really see anything that's going on. So, okay. And then I turned it to white. Yeah, okay. So what this was me attempting to essentially do the exoskeleton thing again, but also jam the letters in there as much as possible. What I was not realizing until I did this, which is essentially the final skeleton, the final foundation, the final doodles and scribbles, basically the ramen that would be the new logo. This would be the final phase, and more or less very, very standard deathcore style. Got plenty of spikes, plenty of rose bush looking thorns, and then, because this one was really, really good with that SS symmetry feature. Obviously, this is the one I decided to go with. It just felt right. It felt nice and edgy. Got to jam in that E in there. And as you can see on the other side, it forms into a lowercase s really, really well. I didn't even mean to do that, but once I saw it, I freaking went with it. And it worked out so well. What I love about the symmetry between the A and the O in this is that the tail that reaches out towards the bottom below the C, that really is where the organectomy inspiration comes in for this logo. I've always been a fan of how bony, how organic their logo looked. More or less the trick with this one was figuring out what I would eventually end up doing for the N and the R. I was trying to figure out the symmetry for that, and usually when it comes to matching and reflecting with symmetry, both an N and an R, usually my thought is to either utilize a capital N and therefore create a bigger exaggerated lowercase r, but with this I really figured out a good formula as to reflecting both a capital R and a capital N. And I think my favorite part about this logo, and my older sister mentioned this to me as well, would be at the top of the N and the R. It looks very, very much like antlers. I've always been fascinated with the racks of antlers, the horns, if you will, but it's, they're called racks. I've always been a fan of how chaotic those can be. And you see the memes. You see the memes for Norwegian black metal bands. And usually you'll see something very, very similar to that. The meme of, okay, this pile of antlers is the logo, right? Exactly what the intention was here. Now, the tricky part was figuring out how to do the C. Because early on, with this logo, with this newer 2024. It was technically supposed to be a 2023 logo, but we don't talk about that. What ended up being a 2024 Sean Cross logo. I wanted to make sure that overall everything matched pretty well. But this was the most entertaining part about making this newer logo, is redesigning the Sean Cross cross. Now, for a little bit of background, I do believe I mentioned this in the prior time lapse, but just in case, this was not originally a cross for Sean Cross. It was actually a cross for a previous band called Upon These Scars, and you can easily see in the sigil made by my buddy Riley that basically you have the U in the middle, the T is the actual cross, and then you have a reflected S that almost looks like a snake. But what I was actually meaning to say earlier, instead of just it matches, is that the C, I was aiming for the C in this logo to actually be a coffin. I tried not to make it too much of a copy of To the Grave, but really they are the only band I know, other than I do believe the Last 10 Seconds of Life Now. No, that's not true. They just have a tablet with a snake on it, and then there's an X for 10. So with To the Grave, I tried to make sure that the cross, the coffin shape, was not incredibly obvious. And I was originally planning to do something a lot more black metal, in which, well, the C would absolutely be a coffin, and most likely most of the other characters in this logo would lead into bat wings, and perhaps the letters inside, other than N and R, or maybe even A and O, I'm not too sure what the plan was, as I did not proceed that way. Essentially what ended up occurring was I decided not to make the coffin, but I might make that for a future variant just to kind of experiment with it, because Ryu Miura of Divinitist did the coffin design and the batwing design really well, or the demonic wing design really well, for one of their newer variants of the Divinitist logo, which shout out to Divinitist, shout out to Ryu Miura, and their graphic art design. They've been doing really well in creating logos and art for various projects across the scene, as well as just, kind of diving into themselves and sampling some stuff. Really, really good stuff. It's been really cool to see Ryu progress and continue doing what they do best, which is logo design, when they're not the vocalist of Divinitist. You can't exactly see it right now, and that's kind of the one whoopsie that I made with this time lapse, is not exactly enlarging the cross. But what I can say is that it was very, very fun to add in those other angles, add in those other talons and shapes, those edges, because that is really the only reason that I decided to proceed the way I did with the logo. Now, the end result, as I'm seeing right now, I basically wanted to make sure that any of these edges were properly defined. Like, there was enough space in between them for this to look pretty clean on the YouTube channel cover, amongst other things. And then I realized at the end of this, I'm like, well, of course I've made what I have already, and you can add, you can do clipping mask and add some texture to the logo, which is what most graphic artists will do, including that of Almanac Design, Alan Gurnja of Distant, Forlorn Design, which is Ethan Jarma of Crafting the Conspiracy. The trick behind all of that is to go ahead and add a clipping mask to the logo itself. Use like maybe 25% opacity industrial textures, and this is inside of Procreate, so I'm not sure how it would work otherwise with Photoshop or any of those other applications, but with Procreate it is easy as selecting various elemental and industrial textures for your pen, for your stencil per se, and then you use like 25% opacity with those textures. You kind of glide them around the logo a little bit, but not too much. That way it's not incredibly obvious. And then, well, depending on the color that you want for your logo, for example, you can do bright red, or you can do maroon red, but then brick red, or kind of brick brown, brick brown. You would first have the background be either red or maroon red, And then after you completely fill in the background, you go ahead and use that texture. You use the clipping mask feature with an extra layer. And then if you just casually kind of glide your pencil, if you have an Apple Pencil, for me, I don't even know what I have, it's a knockoff. But if you go ahead and use that, and if you go ahead and glide that just like across the logo, it provides it a little bit of texture without sacrificing the solid color too much. This was probably the most taxing part of making this logo, is just figuring out and getting all the outlines done. Now, of course, then we get into the more dirty stuff. We get into the more filthy foundation. As you can see here, unfortunately, I'm not was to kind of give both sides of the exoskeleton some spikes, but I realized that it caused way too much chaos. And when you're trying to do a logo like this that is based and centered, epicentered, basically, around an outline instead of just making everything chaotic as hell, that's really where the neatness comes in. That's where the organization comes in. And I'm finding myself gravitating towards that. I think because I've always found insects fascinating. They've always piqued my interest. And with insects, well, they do exoskeletons instead of skeletons. So it's like, what if everything on the inside was hollow? Or what if it was mush, right? I do believe that's kind of where that came from. If not hollowed out bones, that's pretty metal, right? So then you have basically a collection of hollowed out antlers, composed in these already just very strange and chaotic angles, but they provide room for spikes. They provide room for just plenty of different chaos, just levels, depths of chaos to occur. It is a completely different animal, I believe, compared to just making the logo and putting certain textures on it. Of course, you have to have a formula, and there's a lot of graphic artists that I've seen over time, including the legendary Kalen Stokermans, who, they mainly operate with the old English font, but they'll manipulate it accordingly. They'll shrink it, they'll kind of smash it together, and all that you can do in Procreate. So if there's anybody out there who's looking to start getting into graphic art design, and they're looking to get into some logos or get into designing logos, whether it be for metal or maybe even a professional company, the many ways that you can manipulate the calligraphy before you is incredible. And I'm still learning stuff about the app, which is always good, is when someone who's had Procreate, who's had my iPad for at least 3 years now, and who's been slowly working at getting all this done over time, it's like that's what's truly incredible, is when you're able to continue learning even after 3 years. And now they got Procreate Dreams coming out, which is for animation. So that should be really nice. I'm hoping to get into that as soon as possible, because I've always wanted to animate. And I think, for example, an animated intro, not an anime intro, but an animated intro for Sean Cross, even if it's like 10 seconds or something, that shit is really what takes the cake for me. That's what kind of keeps the dream alive. That's what provides new opportunities for many independent artists out there who are really trying to make their mark, as opposed to scheduling, going to school for graphic art design, going to school for animation. You can just do it from home. And if you're really passionate about it, have your job, but work from the comfort of your own home and see how far you can get, see how much time you're willing to invest. I know for me, I've at least invested 100 hours by now, like that first 100 hours really, into doing calligraphy, doing this symmetrical but illegible calligraphy art, or text art, manipulating letters, and especially for deathcore bands, especially for slam bands. I don't know why, it's just always fascinated me. And funnily enough, I mean, a theory as to the answer of that for me would be seeing symmetry in nature with insects, with arthropods like butterflies and stuff, or moths, rhinoceros beetles, whole bunch of different animals, whole bunch of different arthropods. It is incredible to see how the animal kingdom helps them camouflage and manipulate their visual surroundings on the level that they do. So, I mean, wholeheartedly, I can attest everything in my journey so far as wanting to be a graphic artist, wanting to be a calligraphist, a logo designer, a deathcore slam logo designer. I can attest all of that to my fascination with symmetry in nature. Now, one thing I did want to mention, and this happened later in the process of making this logo, if you guys see the cross, the C for cross in the middle, but then you look right below, I didn't even mean to do this, but apparently there's a whole ass xenomorph forehead, and then it almost actually looks like a predator. That's insane. I'm just now noticing this, because at the bottom of the N and at the bottom of the R, you have the eyes, you have what is a four lip mouth. It's actually insane now that I'm seeing it, and I think my younger sister was mentioning this before. Yeah, it looks like a rancor. That's actually pretty cool. I didn't even mean to do that. I really didn't. But that's the amazing thing that occurs when you invest the necessary time into stuff like this. When you have a passion for something, and then you see all of your friends around you doing it on the side of being a vocalist themselves, it is just absolutely inspiring. Now this right here that I'm seeing before me, this would be what is the final touches and the final bits of filth for this logo. This was heavily inspired by the Luciferus Enterprise Earth logo done by Glory Scorification. That's why that name was mentioned inside of the, what is it, on my Instagram, over on SeanCross_YT, my Instagram. It was just simply incredible to see this occur the way that it did. It was really fascinating, and I think the only thing really missing from this logo at this point would be to add the same level of filth above, but in correlation and comparison also to the Luciferus era Sean Cross logo. I do believe that, as opposed to just encircling the whole logo with a whole bunch of filth, at least for now, like, I'm pretty satisfied with how I ended up doing all that. And then, as you can see, a little epileptic warning per se, because wanted to show my older sister, my younger sister, the LED capabilities essentially for this logo. That's also one of my favorite things about Procreate. Gaussian blur, baby. That's all you need to figure out how to turn your deathcore logo, your metal logo, your thrash logo, whatever, into an LED light, is just by adding another frame behind it, same color, but then adding another layer on top of that, after duplicating the logo and filling that layer with the color, merging that layer with the logo, and then essentially after that, you can change the color however you want, but then turn up the Gaussian blur on the logo itself, and therefore you have an LED version of your logo. But I do hope that this was a lot more entertaining than my prior logo time lapse. I appreciate everybody who decides to watch this, and to those who might be interested in commissioning me as a logo artist, as I do this stuff pretty quickly, I do it passionately, and I try to add as much detail and also compact the cost compared to others, simply because the portfolio isn't there just yet. Get in contact with me either through the comment section in what will be this video. You can contact me via email at seancross84462@gmail.com. DM me on Instagram, DM me on Facebook. Let's negotiate a price, and I'd be more than willing to add even more bands, whether it be here in the US or around the world. I would be more than willing to help people get their graphic arts assets in line. You'll be helping me out. You'll be putting some money in my pocket. That way I can financially recover. But otherwise, just like the great eternal music machine, let's keep cranking.